Today's episode comes to you courtesy of Jonathan, who's been supporting this channel as a general tier patron. I truly can do this with the support from amazing patrons like Jonathan, so Jonathan, thank you so much. And for the personalized deck tech, Jonathan chose Runo Stromkirk with a focus on sea monster tribal. Runo is a 1/4 vampire cleric with flying that costs 1 blue-black. When he enters the battlefield, put up to 1 target creature card from your graveyard on top of your library. And at the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. You may reveal that card. If a creature card with mana value 6 or greater is revealed this way, transform Runo Stromkirk. And it transforms into Krothuss, Lord of the Deep, a 3/5 Kraken horror with flying that says, when it attacks, create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of another target attacking creature. If that creature is a Kraken, Leviathan, Octopus, or Serpent, create 2 of those tokens instead. So this is a commander that can provide us an absurd amount of value throughout the game, especially in a sea monster tribal build. By utilizing a lot of powerful Krakens, Leviathans, Octopuses, and Serpents, we can make a ton of token copies of them. And of course, with some of those token copies, well, they're going to have different effects when either they, enter the battlefield or when certain conditions are met. So by getting more and more token copies of them, the effects can get really powerful and really absurd. Now, obviously, we need to meet that transformation requirement to actually get to Krothuss, but that is quite easy to do, especially again, since that ETB from Runo can help us meet that itself as well. Now, with the cards in this deck, and actually with Runo itself, this is a very budget-friendly deck because every single card in this deck, including the commander, is less than $1. And as I take you through the cards in this deck, I'm going to be taking you through different tactics to show you how this deck works and how we're going to win with it. And of course, if you are interested in this deck, make sure you check out that deck list link in the description below. And now with all that said, let's jump into it. First up, there's Wayfarer's Bauble, which we of course can pay 2 to tap and sacrifice to get a basic land in a play tapped. And then we're going to be running our signets with Arcane Signet and Dimir Signet. Arcane can tap for either of our colors, and Dimir Signet we can pay 1 and 2 to tap for both of our colors. Next up, we've got 3 mana rocks that each enter the battlefield. Tap, Cold Steel Heart's going to have us choose a color when it comes into play, and we can tap for that color. And then Sky Diamond and Charcoal Diamond can each tap for one of our 2 colors. Next up, we've got some mana rocks that come into play untapped, but just tap for a colorless. But Prismatic Lens can also help us filter our mana. Liquid Metal can turn a non-land permanent into an artifact, and Mind Stone can be sacrificed to draw a card. Up next, we've got some mana rocks that can tap for even more with some 4 mana rocks that can essentially tap for 2. Firemind Vessel's gun at battlefield tapped. It can tap for 2 mana different colors, and Hedron Archive and Stone Speaker Crystal each tap for colorless. On top of that, Hedron Archive can be sacrificed to draw cards, and Stone Speaker Crystal can be sacrificed to draw a singular card and also exile any number of target players' graveyards. Finally, though, we've got some mana rocks that can tap for a ton with Dreamstone Hedron, which taps for 3 and can be sacrificed to draw 3, and Everflowing Chalice, which has multi-kicker 2, and then it's going to basically tap for half the amount of mana that we put into it. And then outside of mana rocks, we're also going to be running Solemn Simulacrum, Satora Umezawa, and Thrix the Sudden Storm. On ETB, Sad Robot's going to have us get a land in a play tapped, and when it dies, we draw a card. Whereas Satora Umezawa is basically going to give each creature card in our hand ninjutsu for just 2 blue-black, so yeah, we can cheat out some bigger creatures when we get a creature through. And then Thrix the Sudden Storm is a 4/5 with flash and flying, and it says spells you cast with converted mana cost 5 or greater cost 1 less to cast and can't be countered. So this can help us with a lot of our massive sea monsters. Next up, we can also help set ourselves up to flip our commander to help with our sea monsters with cards like Brainstorm, Fact or Fiction, and Monastery Siege. Brainstorm's gonna have us draw 3, then put 2 cards from our hand on top of our library in any order. So yeah, if we've got a creature card in our hand that costs 6 or greater, let's just put that on top so then our commander can see that, and then we can flip it. And then Fact or Fiction's gonna have us do the top 5 cards of our library, and opponent separates those cards into 2 piles. We get 1 to our hand, the other to our graveyard, and again, we can actually get one of our big creatures into our graveyard for our commander to get on top to flip it. So we've also got Monastery Siege, which is an enchantment, and when it comes into play, we choose cons or dragons. If we choose cons at the beginning of our draw step, we loot, and if we choose dragons, it's gonna protect our permanents and ourselves from our opponent's spells. But yeah, looting can be a great way to get creatures into our graveyard. So we're also gonna be running Thirst for Discovery, Reign of Revelation, and Read the Runes. Thirst's gonna have us draw 3, then discard 2 unless we discard a basic land. Rain of Revelation has us draw 3 and discard 1, and Read the Rune's gonna make us draw X, and then for each card drawn this way, we discard a card unless we sacrifice a permanent. Moving on, we've also got some more X mana draw spells with Pull for Tomorrow, Diviner's Portent, and Even the Score. Pull for Tomorrow is gonna have us draw X, then discard a card. Diviner's Portent's gonna have us roll a d20, and then add the number of cards in our hand. We draw X cards if it's a 1 through 14. If it's a 15 plus, we first scry X, then draw X. And then Even the Score is going to have us draw X cards, but it can cost blue less to cast if an opponent has drawn 4 or more cards this turn. Again, just keep in mind that we are running a lot of ramp in this stack, so yeah, we can put a lot into that X. But of course, also keep in mind that we even have some massive creatures that can help us out with Waker of Waves, Stripe Riverwinder, and River Serpent. Waker of Waves first up says creatures opponent control get -1/-0, which of course can be a great way to shrink down our opponent's creatures while this is in play. But perhaps more importantly, we can pay 1 and a blue to discard it and look at the top 2 cards of our library, put one of them into your hand and the other into your graveyard. So this card can actually just get itself into our graveyard, and by doing so again, we can utilize our commander to get on top so we can flip. In a similar way, we've got Stripe Riverwinder and River Serpent, which each have cycling for a blue. And keep in mind that these are obviously considered to be sea monsters, again being serpents, so yeah, we can get a lot of token copies of them if we need to. And speaking of sea monsters, we're also going to be running Nadir Kraken, Reservoir Kraken, and Mesmerizing Benthid. Nadir Kraken says whenever you draw a card, you may pay 1 if you to play +1 counter on Nadir Kraken and create a 1/1 blue tentacle creature token. And then Reservoir Kraken is a 6/6 with Trample and Ward 2 that says beginning of each combat, if it's untapped, any opponent may tap an untapped creature they control, and if they do, tap it and create a 1/1 blue fish creature token that can't be blocked. And Mesmerizing Benthid is a 4/5, and when it enters the battlefield, we get 2/0/2 blue illusion creature tokens with whenever this creature blocks a creature, that creature doesn't untap your controller's next untapped step. And as long as we've got an illusion, this Benthid's gonna have hexproof. So again, just keep in mind that not only can our commander make tokens and make more token copies of these, but these can make tokens as well, so yeah, they can generate us a lot of token value throughout the game. Speaking of value, next up we've got Nemesis of Reason, Gyruda Doom of Depths, and Rexiel the Risen Deep. Whenever Nemesis of Reason attacks, it's going to mill the player it's attacking 10 cards. So if we get some additional copies of this, well, that can take players out quite quickly. And then Gyruda is a 6/6, and when it enters the battlefield, each player mills 4 and put a creature card with an even converted mana cost among those cards on the battlefield under your control. So even though this is a legendary creature, we can still utilize its ETB again and again and again with our commander by making token copies of it. We might lose out on those token copies, but we still get the ETBs, which can be fantastic. And by milling, we can take advantage of our opponent's graveyards as well with Rexiel the Risen Deep. It has Island Walk and Swamp Walk, so it can get through on a lot of players, and when it deals counter to a player, we can cast our instant sorcery from that player's graveyard without paying its mana cost. So this can generate us a lot of value throughout the game. Speaking of which, there's Lockmere Serpent, which is a 7/7 flash, and it's got a lot of abilities, so here we go. Pay a blue, sacrifice an island, it can't be blocked this turn. Pay a black, sacrifice a swamp, you gain 1 life and draw a card. And by paying blue-black, we exile 5 cards to target opponent's graveyard and return from our graveyard to our hand, activating as a sorcery. So this can give us a lot of value, can be hard to deal with, and can get through. And speaking of getting through, there's Shipbreaker Kraken, which is a 6/6 that has pay 6 blue for Monstrosity 4, and when it becomes monstrous, we tap it to 4 target creatures. They don't untap during their controller's untapped steps for as long as we control Shipbreaker Kraken. Or we can get our creatures through thanks to Trumel Kranis, an 8/8 that's got hexproof unless it's attacking or blocking, and it says it can't be blocked unless all creatures defending player controls block it, which can be a massive undertaking for our opponents. Next up, we can also tap down some creatures with Elder Deep Fiend, which has emerged for 5 blue, and when we cast it, we tap up to 4 target permanents. Next up, there's Stormtide Leviathan, which is an 8/8 with Island Walk that says all lands or islands issued with other types, and creatures without flying or Island Walk can attack. Just think about getting a couple of additional copies of this. And then Deep Sea Kraken can't be blocked. It's got to spend 9 for 2 in a blue, but it's going to come down quicker because it says whenever an opponent casts a spell, if it's suspended, we remove a time counter from it. But finally, we also are going to be running Ominous Seas, which says whenever you draw a card, put a Foreshadow counter on Ominous Seas, and by removing 8 counters from it, we create an 8/8 blue Kraken creature token. So this can help us make some massive threats, and yeah, of course, we're not dealt with our massive threats or with messing our opponents just yet. So we're going to be running some bounce spells, starting with Alchemist Retrieval, which can bounce target non-land permanent we control back to its owner's hand, or if we cleaved it, any non-land permanent. And then Depart the Realm's also going to bounce a non-land permanent, and it's got a foretell cost of just a blue. Next up, there's Sword Coast Serpent, which is actually a serpent dragon that's got an adventure that can bounce target creature back to its owner's hand, and we can also, of course, have it as a 6/6 serpent that can't be blocked as long as we have cast a non-creature spell this turn. And speaking of sea monsters that can also help us with messing with our opponents, we've got Rot-Tide Gargantua, Trench Behemoth, and Icebreaker Kraken. Rot-Tide Gargantua says when it exploits a creature, each opponent sacrifices a creature. So getting additional token copies of this can be brutal for our opponents. And then Trench Behemoth can bounce a land back to our hand to untap it and give it hexproof until end of turn. And also, whenever a land is battlefield under control, target creature and opponent controls attacks during its controller's next combat phase if able. So this can be a great way to force an opponent into an attack that they don't want. Or we can keep creatures tapped down with Icebreaker Kraken, which is going to cost 1 less cast for each no land we control, and when it enters battlefield, artifacts and creatures target opponent controls don't untap during that player's next untap step. One of our opponents can be in really big trouble once we get this out. If their things are tapped down, well, we can keep getting token copies of this and keep those things tapped down. Or we can keep bouncing things with Brennan the Moonkraken, Scourge of Fleets, and Slyn Voda. Brennan has, when it enters the battlefield, or whenever you cast a spell with converted mana cost 6 or greater, you may bounce target non-land permanent back to its owner's hand. Whereas Scourge of Fleets says, when it enters the battlefield, return each creature your opponents control with toughness X or less to its owner's hand, or X the number of islands you control. Once we get a decent amount of islands built up, it can be very difficult for our opponents to keep any creatures in play. And then Slyn Voda, the Rising Deep, has a kicker cost of 1 and a blue, and when we kick it, well, when it enters the battlefield, we bounce all non-sea monster creatures, well, and also Merfolk, back to their owner's hands. So this is kind of like a one-sided board wipe on a massive body. Now, as fantastic as all these cards are in this deck, there is one in my opinion that stands above the rest, and that is the Golden Pig of this deck. And the Golden Pig of this deck, the number 1 card out of 99, is Junk Winder. It's a 5/6 serpent that costs 5 blue, but it does have affinity for tokens, so it's going to cost 1 less cast for each token we control. And it says whenever a token enters the battlefield under control, tap target non-land permanent opponent controls, it doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. This can be incredibly brutal in a fantastic way for us to take over the game. First up, with our commander's ability to make a lot of creature tokens, we can cast this for as little as just 2 mana, which is fantastic. And then by making token copies of it, well, we can get that trigger an absurd amount of times, and of course when those tokens are coming into play, we get those triggers, and we can tap down a ton of our opponent's non-land permanents. Essentially, at a certain point, it's going to be very easy for us to tap down essentially all of our opponent's non-land permanents, which then of course do not untap during their next untap step, and we can just keep perpetually doing this. So if, like us, our opponents are depending on, mana rocks to ramp, essentially, they're going to be in big trouble. And of course, they also, can't block our creatures since we'll tap down their creatures and any other, utility artifacts, etc., etc., etc. So yeah, Junk Winder can be an extremely brutal and effective card in this deck, and it is most definitely the Golden Pig. That being said, we are not done with messing with our opponent's things just yet, so we're also going to bounce them with a card like Whelming Wave, which is a one-sided board wipe for sea monsters. And then Aether Gale can also bounce a lot of things by bouncing 6 target non-land permanents back to their owner's hands. Whereas in Garruk's Wake's just going to permanently deal with things by destroying all creatures and planeswalkers we don't control, so this can be a great way to get our creatures through. But now that we've talked about throwing a wrench to our opponent's plans, what are some ways that we can actually protect our own things? First up, we've got Mask of Avacyn, which is going to give equip creature +1/+2 and hexproof. And speaking of hexproof, there's Swiftfoot Boots, which says equip creature has hexproof and haste. Teferi's Time Twist is going to help us out in a different way, though. It says exile target permanent you control, return the card to the battlefield under token's control at the beginning of the next end step. If it enters the battlefield as a creature, it enters with an additional +1 counter on it. So this can be a great way to save one of our permanents and also to make it bigger. And actually, again, keep in mind that, if we are utilizing something that does have an ETB, we get that again. Moving on, a card that can actually help protect our creatures in combat and get them through is Wonder. Because as long as it's in our graveyard and we control an island, creatures we control have flying. And finally, we also have some counter spells that can throw a wrench to our opponent's plans with cards like Sapphire Dragon, or should I say Psionic Pulse. Psionic Pulse is the adventure of Sapphire Dragon. It's going to counter target non-creature spell. And again, with this being on a 7-mana creature, this can help meet our commander's requirement. Speaking of which, there's Mearshell Crab, which is also 7 mana. It's got Ward 3, and it has pay 2 and a blue. Discard it, counter target spell or ability its controller pays 3. And finally, there's You Find the Villain's Lair, which is a flexible spell. We can either choose to counter target spell or draw 2, discard 2. But now that we've talked about every single non-land card in this deck, let's talk about the lands. First up, we've got Helmar Depths, which is going to have us look at the top 3 cards of our library, put them back in any order. Mortuary Mire, which is going to have us put our creature card from our graveyard on top of our library. And Bajuka Bog, which can get rid of someone's graveyard. Next up, of course, there's Command Tower, which can tap for either our colors, Exotic Orchard, which can do so most of the time, and Ash Barrens, which we can basic land cycle away for 1. And then we've got 4 lands that can actually be sacrificed to get one of our basics into play tapped, and Maestro's Theater and Obscure Storefront are actually going to gain us 1 life when they do so. And then Rogue's Passage can help us get one of our creatures through, and Mirror Landscape can be sacrificed to get 2 basics into play tapped that share your land type. Next up, we've got Temple of Deceit, which is going to have us scry 1 when it comes into play, and Choked Estuary and Sunken Hollow, which can each actually enter the battlefield untapped and tap for either of our colors. And finally, the rest of our lands are made up of basics with islands and swamps. But now that we've talked about every single card in this deck, let's talk about the price. Like I mentioned at the start of this episode, every single card in this deck, including the commander, is less than $1, so it's a very budget-friendly deck with an estimated cost of just $28.61. And also, keep in mind that that estimated cost does include the cost of basic lands at 10 cents a piece, so if you already got those basics, there's some extra savings for you there. And speaking of potential savings, you may be able to save even more by buying this deck on TCG Player and utilizing heavily played and damaged cards, which of course need a home too. Though, also keep in mind that that estimated cost does not include the cost of shipping, which might vary depending upon where you live. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support.